Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and today's guest is Mark Townsend. Hi Mark.
Hi Ian.
And Mark is a fascinating character. He's both a magician and an ordained priest of the Church of England. And we're going to find out how in his life he's combined these roles and maybe do some magic tricks and find out more about Mark's journey and what makes him tick in a way. So Mark, one thing that I was reading your biography earlier, one thing was that I was interested that you were quite into the whole mystical spiritual world when you were a teenager, but you chose the Church of England, quite an establishment path.
Yeah, sure. I was about 10, I think, when I started getting into Arthur C. Clarke and the unexplained, all that kind of stuff. And I suppose that kind of search for, well, you know, what we commonly call the paranormal was around for at least the first, my early teenage years. Then I had a dramatic kind of, as some people do, conversion experience. One of my stepbrothers took me to a Pentecostal church, and for some reason it kind of it rang bells to me, and that was my introduction to Christianity. I think I was about 17 or 18 at that stage.
So what actually happened to you when you went to the church?
I think I've been, if you've read my first book, you'll know I've been a kid with a chip on his shoulder for a long time. I grew up probably feeling very self-critical, very negative, a little bit self-destructive. When I walked into that church, I think what hit me, it didn't last long, I must say, the kind of experience, but what hit me was, I think, that word love. It did feel a very loving community, and I just responded. I mean, I took to it like a duck to water. I responded to the very kind of heavy message that was coming across, you know, and it was quite blatant and crude, really. You are sinners, and yet God loves you, and He died for you kind of approach. It doesn't work for me now, but it dragged me in. I think, I mean, when you talk about the Church of England, you see, it took about 2 or 3 years before I came to the Church of England. I'd had 2 or 3 years of Pentecostalism, which kind of worked for me at the beginning, but I'm a natural questioner, and you can't be a questioner in that kind of tradition, really. So it worked for a while. I ended up going off to Israel, working on a kibbutz to try and sort of sort out myself. Met all sorts of things over there, including the more mystical types of Christianity. When I came back home, I just found that the Pentecostal Church could not work for me anymore. And the natural thing was to then find the Church of England, because it seemed to be the closest place that was available to what I'd been experiencing in Israel, in the kind of more Catholic Orthodox type traditions. So that's a long answer, really, to why I chose the Church of England.
And did you see it as something you would do for the rest of your life?
Yeah, you see, even in those, I'm an all or nothing person. Even in those first few months of this dramatic Pentecostal experience, I started to think, maybe I'm supposed to be a pastor. Thankfully, my pastor was very wise, and he kind of calmed me down a bit and said, maybe it's in the future. But it was very much there, the kind of beginnings of what I thought was a calling or a vocation. When I came back from Israel, and I'd had my mind blown, both because I'm a natural questioner and couldn't cope with the kind of Bible says mentality, and also the experiences that I'd had in some of the very traditional holy places of Israel, I kind of felt the Church of England might be a place where I could continue to explore with a bit more freedom some of the questions, but also some of the more kind of Catholic, experiential, symbolic parts of the faith, and possibly take my calling with me. I'm writing about this now, actually, in my 4th book, and it's quite funny going back over it, how it all happened. That was really my introduction into the Church of England. It was a place where I could continue exploring vocation, but also be a lot freer, I think, to kind of explore theological things in a less straitjacketed way.
And did you feel able to combine the magic at that early stage?
Yeah, no, the magic, as in my interest in magic began two types of magic really began when I was 10. The Arthur C. Clarke, the magic of the unknown, and all that stuff, and also the Paul Daniels kind of magic tricks. I've always seen the two as being very closely related. A lot of other people don't. They see them as poles apart. But what happened was I eventually trained for the ministry, and when I was in my theological college, I, in a sense, wanted to find a hobby that would stop me getting totally sucked into churchianity, and I chose magic again because I could do it, and I'd kind of put it on the shelf for a long time. But I went back to a magic club in Hereford, where I come from, joined the International Brotherhood of Magicians, and eventually a magic circle, and started learning card magic and all sorts of illusions, really, simply to be just a hobby, really, that would stop me being dominated by too much church stuff. It didn't last because it became really part of who I was as a priest, but that's how that began.
And so you were able to incorporate
Yeah.
some magic in
Yeah. When I got ordained, very quickly I started being called the conjuring curate, which was it sounds a bit cheesy now, and in a way it was, because everybody goes through when you become a magician, you buy loads of props at the beginning, and most of them are a bit sort of colourful and a bit childish, really. But it's the way in. Lots of kind of visual illusions, and I discovered quite quickly as a curate, being quite a shy person, I realised that doing tricks was a great way to get to know people, a great way to break the ice, even a great way to illustrate things that were hard to talk about just with words.
Yeah.
So, as I say, a lot of my early kind of magic, spiritual magic as I would call it, was a little bit cheesy, a little bit kind of obvious, in what it was trying to illustrate. That has developed a lot. I didn't realise, actually, during these years as conjuring curate, I didn't realise then that there was such a tradition as gospel magic, which there are a lot of, particularly in America, a lot of people, and fair few in this country, a lot of people who use magic as a means to illustrate gospel truths. Again, I've moved a long way from that, because I think magic is an art form in itself, which doesn't have to be used with an ulterior motive to convert people, which at its crudest gospel magic is, at least to illustrate Bible stories or whatever. But to me, magic has a power of its own, and I'm talking illusionary magic now. It has a power of its own to awaken an amazing sense of that kind of childlike wonder and enchantment that a lot of people my age don't experience at all.
Yeah, because it does. It opens your mind. You think, how did he do that? How is that possible? It kind of takes people beyond the constraints somehow, the rational. Yeah.
I often say that if there is such a thing as the left brain and the right brain hemispheres, and I think that's a scientific fact or psychological fact, it puts on hold the left brain overactive, over-analysing mind, and opens people up to that mysterious mind, the intuitive mind. For some, of course, it doesn't. Some people would see a magic trick and immediately get all left brain and kind of rational, and I want to know how it works. I don't think that's a sign of a bad magician if all you're leaving people with is a puzzle. But if you leave people with a sense of, wonder and astonishment and mystery, it can be utterly breathtaking and deeply spiritual.